Hello, this is Professor James Strickler, and this is a course in American government. This lesson is from Unit 1, about theories of government. It is Lesson 12, about conservatism. In this lesson, you'll learn about the philosophical ideas of Edmund Burke, about the wisdom of history, about the essential tenets of conservatism, and about why conservatives are called reactionaries. In the previous lessons, we learned about the concept of ideology and discussed how ideologies can be arrayed on a spectrum. Remember, ideology is a framework of ideas about what the world should be like. This determines what one thinks the government should be doing. We then learned that how we label and arrange ideological positions on this spectrum has its roots in a debate that took place in the French National Assembly of 1789. In the French National Assembly, the radical liberals sat on the left of the room in which they met. The monarchists reacted to the radicals and sat on the right. From this division, we get the modern terminology of saying that liberals are politically to the left and that conservatives are to the political right. But that history does not tell us what liberals and conservatives believe. In the last lesson, we learned what it meant to be a liberal 200 years ago. Now we can learn what it meant to be a conservative. Just as the monarchists in France were reacting to the radical proposals of the liberals, the ideological views that we call conservative developed as a reaction to the perceived mistakes of liberalism. Conservatism, as a coherent intellectual approach, has its roots in the writings of an Irish politician named Edmund Burke. He is known as the father of conservatism. Burke most prominently explained his views in a book he wrote to examine the revolution that the French radicals created. Burke was a fierce critic of the French Revolution, which deposed the French king. But even as a member of the British Parliament, Burke had previously been supportive of the American Revolution. How could Burke have approved of the American colonists throwing off the rule of a king, even his king, but not approve of the French doing a similar thing? To understand how Burke could make such a distinction, we need to explore the essential beliefs of conservatism, as they are explained by Edmund Burke. In this lesson, we will address 3 of these. Edmund Burke observed that the intellectual elites in society often think and act as though they are more knowledgeable, smarter, and wiser than anyone who has come before them. They are arrogantly convinced that their new ideas must be better ideas. This leads them to make critical errors, as they use finely tuned abstract arguments to justify decisions that end up having dreadfully negative practical consequences. They believe their theories, their models, and their calculations more than they believe the evidence of the real world. Because of these concerns, Burke was reluctant to accept the judgment of these elite intellectuals. Instead, he preferred the collective wisdom of the ages. For Burke, the issues we face are the same issues that societies have faced for millennia. Millions of people have already dealt with these same problems and explored a myriad of possible solutions. The best solutions were retained and refined. These became our traditional answers. They are not just prejudices or superstitions, but they are the collective wisdom of all who have gone before us. We can describe this as the wisdom of history, and it is our first essential tenet of conservatism. When we must choose between a new, untried idea or the traditional solution that has worked for hundreds or even thousands of years, odds are that the traditional solution is the better one. The conservative position on same-sex marriage can illustrate this. A conservative will assign great value to the opinions of the millions of people spread over thousands of years who thought it was best to define marriage as being just between a man and a woman. Burke went on to argue that the best way to judge ideas about governance is through measuring practical results. Since the outcome of new ideas is highly doubtful, Burke reasons that we should be very reluctant to alter any practice that has supplied tolerable results in the past. Such ideas have already proven their practical value. This does not mean that society and government should never change. In fact, occasionally change is essential to survival. But such change should be the exception, not the rule. And unproven changes should not be undertaken. This gives us our second essential tenet of conservatism, that practical results matter, not abstract theories. So, for example, the way to convince conservatives to support same-sex marriage would be to implement the practice on a small experimental scale and let its results be observed for many years. Then let conservatives judge whether it has had a positive or negative impact. The wrong way to convince conservatives is to have courts declaring that same-sex marriage must be accepted by everyone because it is a heretofore unrecognized human right. Edmund Burke next pointed out that it is much easier to tear down things than to build things up, and that the passions of a given moment are far more likely to be destructive than constructive. For this reason, Burke's ideal for the best politician is a person who has the preservation of past practices as his default assumption. Such a good leader would still be open to improving things, but would be intent on conserving the best features of the status quo. And for a good leader, radical change would absolutely be the last option, and then only if the traditional way of doing things had absolutely failed. We then have our third tenet of conservatism, that while change is sometimes needed, change must be undertaken with great caution, because it could easily be worse than the thing it is replacing. An old saying can provide a useful summary of conservatism. In a time before indoor plumbing became common, children would be bathed in a tub of standing water, set on the kitchen floor. When a bath was completed, the dirty water would be cast into the yard. The admonition to not throw a baby out with the bathwater was a warning to not mistakenly cast aside good things when trying to dispose of the bad. This is something that conservatives deeply fear as liberals discuss their big ideas for radical change. Conservatives worry that the reformers' obsession with correcting society's ills can lead to a lack of caution and an over-reliance on abstract ideals, which will then lead to the valuable wisdom of history being rejected and lost. When Edmund Burke applied these ideas to the French Revolution, he saw a people who had been ruled by a king for hundreds of years and therefore had no real experience with self-government. Their belief in their ability to remake their government was based on abstract theory, not on practical experience. Burke was sure the French revolutionaries were doomed to failure, and he turned out to be right. The French Revolution collapsed, and Napoleon seized dictatorial power. In contrast, the American colonists had been mostly isolated from the British government for generations. They had lengthy and successful experience ruling themselves. The idea of breaking away from the king and parliament was not a radical move, but the next small and obvious step in their growth. It was surely a profound change, but as a practical matter, it was a rather small change. Because Edmund Burke and other conservatives are so cautious about change, they are sometimes described by opponents as reactionaries. This is a pejorative term. It is meant as an insult. When usually used, it is meant to imply that conservatives have no ideas of their own, but just habitually reject the ideas of others. But there is a certain truth to the criticism that conservatives reactively oppose progress, depending on how you define progress. In this quote from a leading conservative of the 20th century, we see it openly declared that it is a conservative's job to yell, "Stop!" But this does not mean that they always say stop. They do so when they believe the advocated changes will be destructive, no matter how elite, educated, or popular the advocates of those changes may be. That completes this lesson. Now let's review what we have learned. What is the wisdom of history? Is it lost knowledge? Or is it outdated ideas? Is it individual insights? Or is it the cumulative conclusions of society over many years? The wisdom of history alludes to the knowledge that a society accumulates over time. What should guide government and political actions? Should the ideas of educated elites lead us? Or should we be governed by abstract theories? Should practical results be our guide? Or should we be governed by popular opinion? For a conservative, political action should be guided by practical results, not abstract theories. What is the conservative view of change? Should things never change? Or should we cautiously pursue change? Should we constantly change? Or should we pursue radical change? Conservatives believe that change may come, but it should be pursued with infinite caution. Why are conservatives sometimes called reactionaries? Is it because they react to the actions of others? Or is it because they address problems quickly? Is it because they start discussions with their opponents? Or is it because they have revolutionary ideas? Conservatives may be called reactionaries because their views are a reaction to the political actions of others. That completes this lesson. The next lesson will also be from Unit 1. It'll be Lesson 13 about modern liberalism.